Hi there, it's Kim from Alterknit Universe, and I'm going to teach you guys how to knit in the round today. The first thing we want to ask ourselves is, why would we even want to knit in the round? Well, that answer is pretty easy. If you don't work in a circle, then you've got to knit stuff flat and sew it up. That means lots of ends to sew in and seams on your hats, your socks, your jumper sleeves, and all that kind of stuff. There's lots of different methods of working in the round. You've got your traditional double-pointed needles or DPNs. You've got tiny little sock cable needles. You've got traditional circular needles. And you've got some crazy inventions, for example, these crazy trios. I'm going to show you the two most basic methods. In part one, we focused on DPNs. This part, we're going to do circulars. So today, I'm going to show you how to knit in the round using the magic loop method. You're going to need a ball of wool and a pair of circular needles that have a long cable. So to cast on, you're going to get your ball of wool and you're going to make a slip knot just like you usually would. Now it's important to remember that a circular needle is basically two needles just connected by a wire. There we have it, a simple slip knot. You're going to take one end of your needle and stick it through the loop of the slip knot. An advantage of working with a long circular needle is that you only need to buy one long circular needle. You don't need to worry about buying a bunch of different cables to match the length of your project. We're going to be using a magic loop method, which, as you will see, means it doesn't really matter how long your cable is as long as it's bigger than the project you're working on. So you're going to cast on the amount of stitches you need, and don't worry if it goes onto the cable. That's what it's there for. You can use any cast on method you like. Just make sure you cast on the total amount of stitches you're going to need for your project. I'm casting on 16 stitches here so that we can have 8 on either side. Once we've got the amount of stitches we need, how do we get it to go into a circle? What you want to do is slide your stitches onto the middle of the cable. The cable basically connects the ends of two needles to make it easy to work with. Then you want to count to the middle of your stitches. 2, 4, 6, 8. There's the middle. Okay, now this is the cool part. We have 8 stitches on one side, 8 stitches on the other. Now you're going to grab the cable in between those 8 stitches and pull it like that. What you're doing right now is you're pulling the cable, the needles, through the stitches so they start to sit on the wooden bits of the needle. So now we've got 2 layers of stitches, as it were. I like to turn my work sideways at this point and then shuffle those stitches onto the needle. Let me try and show you where I'm not actually covering the needle with my hand. There you go, wiggle it on. Perfect. So now you can see we have 8 stitches on one needle, 8 stitches on the other, and they're connected in the middle. Right there. At this point, I like to treat the needle that's closest to my body as the front needle and the needle that's away from my body as the back needle. And if you watch the DPN video on how to join in the round, it's exactly the same. You're moving one stitch from one needle onto the other, and then the other stitch back onto the other needle. Here we go. So you're taking that first stitch, popping it onto the front needle, as it were. And now, to properly join it, we're going to take this stitch here that was the last one we made, pop it over the needle and onto the back stitch. So now they've kind of zigzagged or swapped places, as it were. Now you can see they're connected on both ends, which is what we want. It's a circle, essentially divided in half. So how the heck do you start knitting with this? Well, that's a good question. So magic loop is kind of cool. So you're going to treat the stitches here as the ones that you're about to knit. They're the ones that are facing you, so at the front. And these stitches at the back, facing away from you, those are the ones we're going to kind of ignore, pretend they don't exist. The ones that are hanging out, the ones that don't exist, we need to get those onto the cable needle so that we can knit the other ones. And here's how you do it. So we're going to take the back needle where the pointy end is, and we're going to pull so that those back stitches are just hanging out on the cable there. So you'll notice the reason why we call it magic loop is because we've got a loop on this side, and we're about to make another loop on the other side. So I pick up my needle, because we're going to need that right hand needle to knit with. We also need the left hand needle to knit with. So now I can slide these stitches to the edge of my needle, and I can start knitting. And just like with DPNs, the stitches at the back, just going to totally ignore them. They don't exist. So when you're starting the round, this is where some people get a yarn over by accident. Let me show you how to do it. So if you go in like this, you're going to be creating a yarn over. So you want to make sure that the yarn is at the back of the work. Then you can take your needle and start knitting. And you can see that this bit of yarn here is connected to this stitch that's on the cable. So as we start knitting, they're going to be best friends. And we just knit and knit. And as we're going, for those of you who are interested, this is how I hold it. So I've got 2 fingers above this line and 2 fingers below. Very simple. And I'm actually just not even touching the cable on this side with my hand. Now, we knit the last stitch. Brilliant. This is now an empty needle. We can put that to the side. And then we're going to turn our work like this, so that the stitches we've just knitted are at the back of our work here, and the stitches we want to knit are at the front facing us. So then what we can do is we know that the stitches we want to knit need to be on the needle. So I can pull here those stitches, wiggle them onto my needle like that, and this one we want hanging out at the back, so I can pull it and pop it on the cable. Now don't pull too tight, otherwise you won't have enough room to maneuver your needles, and that can get really uncomfortable to knit with. Now we can pick up our knitting and start knitting again. You want to keep that first stitch kind of tight, but not too tight, otherwise you're going to find it really hard to get your needle into that stitch. Just a top tip. So I don't really have that much more to say to you about this magic loop method, but I'm going to go ahead and let you watch me work. You want to make sure that the loops on either side aren't too tight so that you've got a little bit of wiggle room. But other than that, you just basically continue to do that over and over again. So I'm about to come to the end of the row here, and we're about to swap. So I'm doing the little turny thing. I'm putting the stitches I want to work onto the needle, and then the stitches I just worked, we'll go ahead and pull those away. So there you go. Bada bing, bada boom, as they say. You're on your way. I always like to remember that the stitches I've just knitted are the ones that we want to hang out in the back. So those are the ones that need to be on the cable. And then the stitches that we want to knit are the ones that need to be on the actual needle part of our circular needle. So these are the ones we've just knitted. So we know that those are going to be pulled onto the cable. And we know that these ones are the ones we want to knit. So we're going to pull those on there. Obviously, with every knitting, every type of needle, make sure you don't pull too much and actually lose your stitch. It can happen when you get a little bit too excited with your magic loop knitting. If you're struggling with tension, sometimes what I like to do is go ahead and pop this cable next to my needle for the first couple of stitches, because it keeps them nice and tight and best friends. And you can let them chill out and do whatever they want. But there you go. That's knitting in the round. Thank you for watching. So that concludes part 2 of knitting in the round. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them in another video.